Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this conversation with our distinguished panelists, sharing their thoughts on how effective legislative oversight can make the operations of all levels of government more useful and meaningful to the end user. My name is Linda Gustitis. I am the Senior Advisor at the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy, which is hosting this event. We are located at Wayne State University Law School in Detroit, Michigan, which is our main office. And we also have an office in Washington, D.C., where 3 of our staff reside. One of the center's main missions is to foster and improve fact-based, bipartisan legislative oversight. Because, as our founder and namesake, the late Senator Carl Levin said, you can't have good government without good oversight. And by good government, he meant government that meets the needs of the people. We do this at the center through hosting events such as this, conducting trainings of legislators at the federal, state, and local level on best practices for oversight. We do research into and promote research into the field of oversight and civic education about legislative oversight. We also support civic discourse and fact-based public policy. I encourage you to visit our growing website, which honestly is loaded with almost everything you would want to know and more about legislative oversight and what we do. But now let me introduce today the Master of Ceremonies, or I should say the person who will be moderating this discussion. He is one of the Levin Center's staff who provides development and training for our State Oversight Academy. His name is Ian McKnight. Ian is a native of West Michigan. He earned his BA in Political Science and American Studies at Kalamazoo College in 2019. And before joining the Levin Center, he worked for a member of the Michigan House of Representatives, and he conducted software implementations and training for state legislatures across the country. We are very lucky to have him on our staff. So I'll turn this over to Ian now, knowing that everyone here is in very good hands. And I hope you will all find the conversation informative and engaging. Ian?
Thank you so much, Linda. And as someone who spent much of 2020 in the Michigan legislature doing unemployment insurance constituent casework and did a stint as a government tech contractor before I came to the Levin Center, I could not be more excited to introduce you to our panelists today. We have 3 very sharp people who have devoted a lot of work and a lot of careful thought to getting government to work well. Jennifer Pahlka is a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and the Federation of American Scientists. She founded Code for America, which she led for a decade, and served as the nation's Deputy Chief Technology Officer under President Obama. She is also the author of an excellent book, Recoding America: Why Government is Failing in the Digital Age and How We Can Do Better. Next up, Michael Brennan is the CEO and co-founder of Civilla, a nonprofit design studio serving public institutions, and the Levin Center's neighbor in Midtown Detroit. Michiganders see Civilla's work in action when they apply for public benefits or receive the state's very slick new driver license and vehicle registration renewal mailings, among other things. If you're a fan of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, you've also heard Civilla's work in Michigan held up as a national example of how Medicaid enrollment and renewals ought to be nationwide. Finally, Representative Jeff Johnson joins us from South Carolina, where he serves as the chair of what is perhaps the most proactive and systematic state legislative oversight operation in the country. If you have heard a Levin Center presentation about state oversight, you have more than likely heard as an example about the work that Representative Johnson and his team do every day in South Carolina. I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we'll take questions from the audience. You can send questions our way using the Q&A feature in Zoom. To start things off, I'd like to hear from each of our panelists. Why are you interested in the work you do to make government more responsive to the needs of people, and how did you come into it? And I think we'll start with Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. Let me be part of this panel. when I first ran, I wanted to help people, and in my background, that's what I want to do. And when I got elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives, that was one of the things that really drove me to look for, which is how can I help my constituents and what is available um, in Columbia, in the State House, to help me do that. And oversight was a way to do it. Of course, you can be on different standing committees. It can be judiciary, it can be medical affairs, labor, commerce, whatever. But oversight, um, since it investigates, studies agencies, and actually makes them come in, present before the committee, the subcommittees, tell about themselves, and really an engaging process. I said, that's where I wanted it to be. Got on that committee and became chairman. And it's really to make sure that government runs efficiently and it serves the people that it's supposed to be serving and does it.
Thanks very much. And I think next we'll hear from Jen Pahlka.
Thanks, Ian. I'm really excited to be here because I've at this point in sort of my journey with making government work better. I think oversight is such a critical part of it, and not a part that we have engaged with enough in the service design community. So I'm really glad to be here. I got into this. I probably for the same reasons of wanting to help people, but also because I could see a particular place where we, from the tech community and the design community, could be particularly helpful. And one way that expressed itself is when I was running Code for America and we got asked to work on the SNAP program in California. And at the time, we had the lowest rate of participation in the program of any state except Wyoming. And you wouldn't think that, but that was the state of things in California at the time. And it became very clear very, very quickly that it was not an awareness problem, rather. People did know about the program. It was just extremely hard to apply. And we really needed to bring some human-centered design to that process. And, long story short, we were doing that in California, really, I think, at the same time that Michael was doing that through Civilla in Michigan, bringing very much the same sort of set of practices to the table. But the reason I think this is so important now, both Michael's work and Code for America's work and the work of many others has actually succeeded in raising the participation rate. In other words, the number of people who are eligible who actually get the benefit. But those practices are very hard to sustain and to spread if they are being judged in the oversight world by the sort of legacy set of practices that got us those very hard to use applications in the first place. So I'm just excited to be here for this conversation to kind of start bringing together, what does it look like to do agile user-centered development and have the oversight, the expectations that come from the other parts of government actually match that, because it is really hard to do agile user-centered development in a waterfall world. And we'll talk about what that means.
Great, thanks so much. And next up, we've got Michael.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be participating with our next door neighbor at the Levin Center, which is great. And to be able to join Jen Pahlka and Representative Johnson, who have, dedicated lives to this work. And that's no small feat. So just happy to be here. I mean, when I think of the question, my mind first goes, part of it's just the way I was raised. So I would look, and say, my parents were just ones that if you weren't making it better, then what the heck were you doing, kind of thing. And And then I happened to fall into work, probably by the grace of God, 40 years ago, that I started with in Detroit, United Way. And then I had a 35-year career that was local, national, international, and just got to see a lot of the helping system, not just through the eyes of that organization, but really through the three sectors: public sector, private sector, and the NGO world. And one of the things that I concluded was you could get change in community, but it looked and felt more like it was getting rented. It was like we were renting change. Like if we had enough resource and enough attention in the moment, you could see a change condition. I saw that with high school turnaround. I saw that with early childhood. I saw that with food delivery. I mean, just a whole span of things. But to really get the sustained change, that was much, much harder to come by. You know, that to me was elusive. And I often found the helping system, it didn't matter what sector this was, public, private, or nonprofit, that were coming together, we're kind of on the same narrative and using the same tools to get after these entrenched problems. And you could almost play out the movie on what would happen. You know, we might get short-term gain, we might rent it, but we wouldn't get the sustained thing. And it really had me, you know, and call me slow, because it took me a long time to really say, if we don't get to these underlying issues, the underlying structure, the underlying governance, the underlying like tools that people are interacting with, we're actually not going to be able to make headway. It'd be like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone, you know. It might feel like it were, you know, it's doesn't hurt as much, but the bone is still broken, and we got to go and we got to fix that. And all that to say, that ultimately led me to just a really deep confidence that a big part of the problem solving and a big part of finding the solutions rested with us understanding the end user, that in fact the individual we were trying to serve, or the frontline team that was employed to work with often residents, and that the insights and the answers that we most needed were actually there, and we needed to develop a capacity to, as leaders, and it didn't matter if this was in government, this NGOs, or in private sector, we needed to have a different tool set that we could reach for to begin to look at problems in a new way, so we could imagine solutions and certainly look for things that were much more durable versus just renting them. And that ultimately led me to co-create Civilla in Detroit, which is it's a nonprofit, human-centered, design-focused, doing work across the country to help states, by and large, get friction out and humanity in.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Michael and Jen, you've already used the terms agile and waterfall. Those are familiar to many people who may have worked in tech, but that tends to be a little bit of a foreign term elsewhere, even if it's a really useful way to think about the work we're doing. Can you tell us a little bit more about waterfall versus agile thinking, what it means in terms of process, and how it affects end users?
I'd be happy to, though I also am going to call on Michael to join in this, because he's somebody done amazing work with it. You're right, it is a term from technology, and I'm sorry for using it without clarifying it. And I'll explain what it means in the tech world, but I also just want to be clear that it's a metaphor for something larger. So you can have no technology involved at all and still be contrast agile ways of working and waterfall ways of working. So I'll start with the definition from the tech world. It comes from building software, where the legacy way of working was that you would say, we are going to spend this phase of the project developing the requirements for this project. Then we will go into a design phase, and then we will build it, and then we will test it, and then it's done. And a key principle of the waterfall process is that you never go back. You will mess everything up if later on you decide that maybe your requirements that you gathered up front are wrong, or something's changed. The idea is to lock it down and just do exactly what was figured out in the phase before. And one of the critical things about waterfall picks up on something that Michael said. In waterfall, it's at the very end that the people who are going to use the system actually get to take a look at it and see if it works for them. Now, sort of in the 90s, there became a bunch of software developers got together and they said, this just doesn't really work. Like, it's a bit of a myth to say, especially if the project takes several years, that 2 or 3 years later, we're absolutely sure that those requirements were the right thing. And they said that there's a different way of doing this, that is more, instead of a linear thing from from requirements to testing and deployment, we want to be in what we call a build, measure, learn cycle. So you're going to try something out, you're going to test in the real world with users, and you're going to measure what worked and what didn't, how well it worked. And then you go back to build and you change it, and then you test it again, and then you go back. It's just fundamentally different from the waterfall software development methodology. But, let's take that and sort of pull it out of software development. What else sounds like that? Well, we pass a law, and then we hand it off, and then we write the regs, and then we do the implementation. And then maybe if it's a benefit program or something else, there's a website that gets developed, and then it hits the public. But we never go back, or we very rarely go back. And one of my favorite ways of describing the frustration with waterfall processes, be they software development or policy implementation or anything else, really, is my friend Clay Shirky had this quip: the waterfall methodology amounts to a pledge by all parties not to learn anything during the actual work. And that's what you see happening, is that the people on the ground doing the work actually do find that the requirements weren't quite right, or something has changed, or the users are telling us that they don't understand this language. But if you're locked into a waterfall method, you just have to deliver on what was put out, 2 years ago or whatever. And we don't get that learning, and we get websites, to put it, in a very concrete way, we get websites that don't work for people. We get websites that someone applying for SNAP can't literally get through. They don't understand the questions. It doesn't work on a mobile phone. It's very intimidating. All these things are things that you learn if you're in a build, measure, learn cycle, such that when it actually gets out to the public, they can get through it and they can work on it. Now there's a whole role for human-centered design in here. And I think that, even more broadly than just its technology development, its policy development, we really have to talk about the ways in which all of government is built as a waterfall. And that makes it harder for us to learn what really works for people.
Thanks. And Michael, I know that using this build, measure, learn stuff and working with human-centered design is one of the things Civilla does best. I know this because I remember the first time I saw the public benefit application form you all produced. I was working in the Michigan legislature, and it was, it's the government form equivalent of marching miles and miles across the desert and being handed a glass of ice water. It's just amazing. I would love if you could tell us more about your process and how you tie in with all of this.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate Jen just lifting up the important term to me in all of that is learning, and there's having confidence that the residents that we serve or the frontline workers that are administering many of these programs, they carry a deep subject matter expertise. So it's one thing that we come to at Civilla is really trusting that deep subject matter expertise of the end user. And they uniquely provide levels of insight, often solutions, that get friction out and humanity. And probably the best way, I'm going to ask Margot to pull up it's just a handful of slides, but I've just found no better way to explain the work that Jen was just referring to than just, like in the real world, what does this actually look like? And we've all seen this, like literally, like on campuses, could be corporate campuses, could be college campuses, or going through a city. We see this kind of thing all the time. And we call this the person on the path. And Civilla got put in the world because the brick path, and I would put myself first in line, having built a number of brick paths, right? So this is not like pointing the finger, I'm pointing it right back at me, meaning I got very clear about what the problem was. I got the very best practice. Minneapolis implemented this and they had these record results, and we're going to take that and we're going to place it into our community. And we buy the bricks, we lay the plan, and the path looks perfect as designed to spec. And lo and behold, this starts happening. The end user says, that's not actually the path that I want. That's not actually the path that I need. And it's taken me, I hate to say it, but probably 10 years of unlearning, of just saying that the 100 years of problem solving, 150 years of problem solving that we all got trained on to build the brick paths, it's not that that's unimportant, but at the end of the day, it got us too far from the very person that we're trying to serve. And what I was finding is that the conversation in the middle of the table for leaders was around the institution itself, or the conversation and the questions were around the money, or they were around the technology, or they were around the policy, or they were around the business process. They were never around understanding the end user needs and how might we redefine the problem in ways that we're currently not. Not that money, not that policy, not that technology or the institution needs don't need to be addressed. But I got to a place of having 100% confidence that that would all arrive no matter what. Like I literally wouldn't have to work at ensuring that those questions and those demands would arrive. They have a unique ability, and we've built those kind of things into our structures over 100 years. But we haven't really built, this is true to Oversight, this is true to most leadership teams, we haven't built a capacity to learn to ask the questions of end users to provide a set of insights that can help us start to go about it differently. So we put Civilla in the world 8 years ago to help courageous leaders inside of institutions, public serving institutions, who said, I know how the brick path movie plays out, and I'm ready for something different, and to begin to take a step at first, trying to understand their end user that they're serving. And for us, we call that often two sides of the coin. That can be the resident and the frontline worker as those end users, because often that's where deep answers are. If we go to the next slide. When we first started Civilla, this form that you see up on the page, and I don't know if you can see my screen, but I'm holding it up here. If we were in person, Jen has seen this. I think I unfurled it over one time. This was the public benefit application in Michigan to be able to access food, childcare support, Medicaid. And it ended up being the longest public benefit application in America. It's 42 pages long, 18,000 words, 1,000 questions. And if you got to question 17, it asked you, tell us the date of conception of your children. Not their birth date, tell us the date of conception. I show this as, like, I don't think anyone's waking up, by and large, to go create the longest public benefit application in the country. But this is the cumulative effect of addition versus subtraction. This is the cumulative effect of legislative mandates, federal mandates, departmental mandates, requirements from lawsuits that got built out over 30 years. They took 5 full-on efforts to get this change in 30 years, and they never got there. Why? What we said to them is, for the state of Michigan, we just started on our own 8 years ago, and we started sitting side by side with residents and frontline workers to understand their story of navigating public benefits in the United States. And if we can go to the next slide, Margo. And this is not a focus group. It's not that focus groups are unimportant. This isn't like we surveyed 5,000 people on a Likert scale. This was often 2-hour interviews of residents at their kitchen table. This was sitting side by side with frontline workers who are navigating 2.5 million of these forms every year in Michigan to understand what is it that they know and see in this. Out of that produced a set of insights that ultimately sparked the interest of the leadership in the state of Michigan through 2 administrations. This started in a Republican administration, continues with a Democratic administration, to say, we're going to actually reimagine how we bring forward the benefits that we're charged with stewarding, but we're going to do it through the eyes of those that we serve, and we're still going to meet all of our required mandates. Like, we can do that, but we can have this voice be a really critical part of how we go about this design. And I'll just leave it with, if we go to the last slide, we ended up with an application. If you remember the long scroll, 42 pages long, this is an application that got designed sitting side by side with residents and frontline workers. Their fingerprints are all over this. It's 80% shorter in words and questions, 60% shorter in pages, goes through the system in about half the time. They spend 75% less time correcting errors, and residents are getting it completed in under 15, 20 minutes. Before we could take a prototype out into an office, I asked them, is there anything that we just need to make sure? Oh, they said, oh, by the way, the prototype, you can't use that. You need to make sure it meets all of the legislative federal regulations. I said, well, send that over. This is what I got sent to me. (1,726) pages of administrative burden regulations that 2,500 caseworkers, 5,000 caseworkers need to understand and navigate through, that technology systems have to go and code it all in, and 2.5 million residents have to navigate it. There's just no way that 1,726 pages of mandated regulations is what is required in order to carry out the charge of these organizations. But you don't get there by just a quick, like, let's just shorten it. It's really through deep user work.
Well, thank you. And you've both done such a wonderful job for setting us up to talk about legislative oversight. Michael, you talked about the cumulative effect of all these mandates, and we touched on this build, measure, learn process. And when you look at legislatures, there's a lot of build process, but what we like to talk about at the Levin Center is the measuring and the learning. And I think a lot of that happens in legislative oversight. So I want to bring Representative Johnson into the conversation now. And Representative Johnson, I wonder if you might be able to tell us about some of the work that you're doing in South Carolina. You take a really proactive review, or a really proactive approach to reviewing program operations and measuring and learning from them for legislating. Can you tell us about your approach and how you go about this?
Yeah, certainly can. And the prior speakers, it's enlightening kind of how they have spoken on what they've seen and what they found. And I looked at their slides, and that's what we do. But what we do is we try to look at, in the oversight process, we deal with these agencies. We first, at the beginning of session, we're a 2-year session in South Carolina, and we get together as a committee. We identify those agencies that we want to take under review. That's the first process. And each agency, we want to review every agency within a 7-year period. And whenever we get together as a committee, we identify the agencies that we think we can, in that 2-year period, identify and not be rushed, and do a good job of investigating and reviewing those agencies. We identify them, we read them across the desk at the General Assembly, the South Carolina House of Representatives, so that everybody knows at the beginning of the 2 years, we have identified these agencies. Get ready, we're going to be meeting with you. And as soon as that happens, we send out a formal letter to those committees. And then my staff, Oversight, schedules a meeting with these agency director, leaders, and gets with them and tells them what the oversight process is. And also, we release a public survey, which is on our website, the Legislative Oversight website, through the House. And the agencies themselves are also directed through a letter that we send these agencies to send to all of their staff members, so that they will know, here's the link, you go, and it's anonymous, and tell us what your concerns are. And when we set up that process, we get this information in, we have the leaders of, and normally there's about 3 that shows up to the subcommittees. And I have different subcommittees in the legislative process. One might be for education, law enforcement, for example, and they come and they will testify, and they're put under oath. The director is, and whoever else the leader is that the director wants to speak, put under oath to tell us what's going on in your agency. And we're responsive. Staff and the members of the subcommittee are responsive to what they hear, what the testimony is, and we send out directives for them to get us information to go back to their agency, gather information, and send it to us, and we have more meetings. And it's it's kind of like Jennifer said, it's a go back and look for them. Okay. They have the statutory scheme and regulatory scheme that they work under, but they get so much kind of like a business where they take care of their day-to-day activities that they really don't ever go and look back at really what do they need to do. So we have the survey process, we have the public input process, online anonymous, that brings up where some of these shortfalls can be with these different agencies. And then we have these hearings, we have public input where the public themselves, who are the users, the people who are receiving the services from this agency, who comes to the subcommittee, and it is a very direct question and answer series. And whenever these people show up who are the users, if they are really supportive of the agency and how it's performing its duties, then they speak on it. If they are not happy with how that agency is conducting their duties and they're getting the services to the citizens of the state, then they will let us know. And that is normally what happens. And we have had hours of testimony who are the people who are receiving these services saying, here are what the problems are. And then once we gather all this information together at the subcommittee level, then it is, of course, given into a report. And when that report is prepared, it comes to the full committee, and then every legislative member, those are members who are on all the subcommittees, are there. And we again have the leaders of these agencies show up and they speak as to kind of what they've seen during this review process and where they think their shortcomings are and what recommendations that they think that we need to make to the General Assembly, which is in the form of bills to be filed or regulations to be filed, to be passed to give them the ability to do what they need to do to make sure that the end user gets the best service. And at the end of that process, we look and see, okay, what bills do we think that we agree with these agency leadership, and the members on oversight also prepare their own bills and regulations and file them to make these agencies work better. So that's kind of just a little basic scheme of how we do it in South Carolina, to go back and look at what they're supposed to be doing and try to make them better. And that's just a little process of how it gets done.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to talk about working with people and with culture in just a minute. I think that's something you all have experience with. Before we get into that, let me say to our audience that we would love to hear your questions. Please, if you have anything you'd like to ask, please, you can fill out a little Q&A form by clicking the Q&A button in Zoom. Please send your questions along. Moving right along, Jen, you write in your book that culture eats policy for breakfast. And that is something that is really true. I think we've all seen it in our work with government agencies and with people everywhere. We've talked a lot about regulation and policy so far. I'd like to hear about everyone's experience with culture. What is the significance of culture when you're working on these sorts of changes in government? What have you experienced with it, and what are some steps you can take to modify culture to make it more responsive to people? I'll leave that for whoever would like to dive in first.
I'd be happy to start. I think there's some very current examples of this. When I say culture eats policy, what I mean is that the policy intends one thing, but the way it's operationalized, you kind of get not that thing. Sometimes it's just a weaker version of that, as in very low participation rate in a program that should have, be benefiting more members of the public. Sometimes it's, you kind of get the opposite. And one good example of this, and I'll speak from the federal level, the policies around hiring, merit-based, fair hiring. You go look at them, there's nothing wrong with what's written. But if you see how that they've been operationalized by HR folks, and it's not one person, it's not one level, it's just a sort of just descends through that waterfall, that hierarchy. The practices really aren't particularly fair, and they're certainly not meeting the needs. If in the interests of fairness, you say, I don't want subject matter experts looking at these resumes because they'll introduce bias, then you end up hiring people who were the best folks at cutting and pasting from the job description into their resumes. You end up getting the people who know to check, that they're the master on every single level in a self-assessment, because assessments are seen as introducing bias, and you get the opposite outcome. And so that's a culture doing that, not the law, not the policy. And we need to work at that level. The example that comes to mind for me right now is a really painful one, which is what's happened with the FSA and the FAFSA form for students trying to get federal aid to go to college. It's clear, like, serving that population has absolutely been a key priority of the Biden administration. They didn't get all what they wanted on the policy level, but they, unfortunately, we haven't served those students well, because the redesign of the FAFSA, which I'm forgetting what it stands for right now, but Federal Application
Free Application for Federal Student Aid, FAFSA.
Free Application for Federal Student Loan. Congress ordered the FSA to redesign this form. I think actually, ironically, inspired a bit by the work that Civilla does and the work that the United States Digital Service and Code for America does. We knew we could make a better application. But they didn't, they used the legacy practices, the waterfall practices, to redesign that application, and it worked very poorly. And so you had a lot of people who couldn't use it. And then there was this sort of cascade effect of heartbreak out of that. One effect of the form being designed and built in such a way that we didn't learn and we couldn't change was that kids whose parents did not have Social Security numbers could not use the form, and they were told to email the documentation of those parents to the to FSA, and 70,000 of those emails got lost in an email inbox until it was too late. And those kids who have worked so hard to be prepared to go to college, often, first generation college going kids, a lot of them are not going to be able to go to college. And it's not for lack of policy. It's a culture that's focused more on the policy than on the consistent and effective operations of the agency to make sure we serve the public. And those processes are not required by law, as many people say. The way of building an application that does work is absolutely accessible to public servants. And we need to change the culture that encourages public servants to adopt the processes of agile and user-centered design and development of these, and to focus on the operations. But they feel that is risky. They feel that the legacy way of doing it is the safe way to do it. And we have to, I think leadership really needs to see, how do we tell public servants that we want them to focus on the outcome over the safety of a legacy process that they can stand behind it when they're called in front of an oversight body.
Great, thank you so much.
Culture's a huge question, and that could be 5 webinars to itself. Yeah. I've always viewed culture, this is the Michael Brennan back of the napkin thing on culture. but it's, to me, there's like 5 levers that a leader has in culture. It's people, process, technology, space, and the values that sits upon. And a manager, a leader, is trying to always gauge what is the volume and the velocity of the change that they can bring to people, process, technology, space, and the values that they want to evolve inside of the organization. Often what happens and why a lot of culture efforts fail is go too wide too fast. Like, it's like trying to throw the switch and we're changing everything. And again, you can get like a temporary moment, but you don't get the real and enduring change. I think one of the challenges, most culture change that I've seen successfully in organization is a good 4 to 7 year walk of like high intention in, with term limits and legislative cycles and all those kind of things. That ends up being a real challenge inside of public sector. But I will say one thing that has stood out to me is when leaders get a tightly scoped proof point across the finish line, and they carried that out in the manner that they feel like much of the operation ought to go about the work, they're in a stronger position to be able to point to the proof point that they successfully got across the finish line in the manner that they had imagined, and say, let's go do this the way we did that. And then when they have not just one, but then they have 2, and then you have more saying, well, could we pursue something like that? I've seen the greatest change inside of large institutions when they have the persistence to start with a strong proof point and then widen and widen and widen and manage the volume and the velocity on how much they are trying to change people, process, technology, space, and values all at once.
Thank you. And Representative Johnson, anything to add with your work with culture?
Yes. And I'm going to, of course, address it from the way we do it in South Carolina, what I've seen through the process that we use in South Carolina. And what I've seen whenever I've reviewed these different agencies is, agency culture falls directly on the shoulders of the leadership and how they allow culture to affect their agency operations. Often what I see whenever we have public input, we have staff input, we have things like that. A poorly performing agency normally is shown through poor leadership, and that leads to poor culture. You have staff turnover, a high amount of staff turnover. You have kind of what Michael said, which I think sometimes can lead to it, which is kind of the person on the path. Let's do it this way only, and let's not listen to the staff members who are doing it. Let's not listen to the end user of these services. Let's just keep doing it the way that we're doing it and become very rigid, which is a leadership problem. Your staff has to have trust in their leadership and that what they're doing is making the agency have better quality and serve the citizens and those end users a lot better, because the staff really enjoys, good staff members enjoy what they do in an agency, and good leaders should promote that. And sometimes when we have done these investigations and these review of agencies, we have had to bring in the inspector general, state inspector general, to go in and do their own investigation and report back to us as to how is this agency running, what is the culture in that agency, does that affect their ability to serve their mission, accomplish their mission by serving the people. And often what happens if there's poor culture and there's a poor leader, then during the legislative oversight process in South Carolina, leadership changes. The directors of these agencies change. So yes, when it comes to culture and how policies work and what the mission of that agency is, it all has to run together. And a lot of that is leadership, and oversight is really, really good at the legislative level to make sure that what the General Assembly wanted done in these statutes, these regulations, that they're being properly implemented, and that the culture in getting these done in the agency, makes that happen. So in that process, we have seen that happen several times, and we've made some changes or caused changes to happen in these agencies.
Ian, I wonder if I could add to my answer and bounce a little bit off Representative Johnson as well. I have an ask, I think, of our elected leaders who conduct oversight, and it's a big one. But I observe the reaction to some of the stories I told in my book, like a woman named Yadira Sanchez at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, who gets a really great outcome in the implementation of a law that is handed down to CMS after healthcare.gov, which was such a failure. And when people read about what she did to get such a good outcome for Medicare recipients and the doctors who serve them, they observe that she really put process sort of second and kind of got out of her lane and really focused on the right outcome and had to really swim upstream really, really hard to get that outcome. And that she put herself at risk by doing that, because the safe thing to do as a public service is to do just sort of what you're told to do and follow procedure. And I mean, she didn't do anything illegal, but, and then, legislative staffers and others on the Hill have said, but that's the kind of behavior we want out of public servants. We want them to put outcomes over process. We want them to take those risks. We want them to do things they know will work instead of the thing that's safest for them. And so what I say to them is, then we need to spend like half of our oversight muscle telling people what good looks like, not just looking for the things that have gone wrong, but saying this risk-taking that Yadira Sanchez did is what we want from public servants, and we want to lift that up as the right kind of behavior. But if we don't spend as much time lifting up what good looks like as we do clarifying what you can get in trouble with, we're not going to change the culture.
Ian, I saw that there was a question on expound on what's proof point.
Yes.
Maybe I just give 2 seconds on that. When I say proof point, if you take the example we talked about in Michigan, where you had the longest public benefit application in America, you had a leadership group that was committed to seeing a new application implemented that was user-centered driven all the way through, up to including training and stakeholder engagement and communications. They brought that all to life. They got it across the finish line, and they got the new application launched statewide successfully. That created for them a proof point that then they could point to. Let's go do renewals the way that we did the application. Let's go do correspondence the way we did the application. Let's do the online portal the way we did the application. And that proof point of getting it across the finish line and implemented created a lever of change inside of the organization.
Thanks. I see one question we have, and Jen, I know you're typing an answer to this, Zoom tells me, but I'd like to have us answer it live from everyone. In your opinion, what issue or policy should be our #1 priority to implement user-friendly programs in government? What's your magic bullet?
I'll type mine so my co-panelists can answer live.
Great. Whoever would like to take it.
Well, this isn't a policy. My first thing is I would ask leaders, first thing to do is go spend time with the end user. Like that's like just part of the requirement. I would ask Oversight to find a way to get proximity. I would find ways that three simple questions got asked on a consistent basis of leaders of departments within Oversight, within team meeting is, who is the user that we're talking about right now? What is their need? And how do we know? And in terms of where HCD is applied, particularly if it's a first-time effort, I'm probably more agnostic on where. I would say I would pay more attention to, is it tightly scoped? Do you have the right leadership that's wrapped around it to ensure that they're going to withstand the, you're going against resistance. Human-centered design by nature is disruptive inside of it. It's not just additive, it's disruptive, and it takes courageous leadership. And so I would say tightly scoped, and it'd be far more important to get 1, 2, 3 across the finish line than trying to go too wide, too fast on too many things.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, anything to add there?
Ian, can you repeat that question real quick?
Sure. In your opinion, what issue or policy, and I'm going to add in as a third item, what issue, policy, or practice should be our #1 priority in making user-friendly government programs a reality?
And I thought that's what your question was. I just wanted to make sure that fully understood it. Michael hit exactly what I was thinking, and what we do in Oversight is, and that's why when I went through the process earlier, I said, what we really try to do is to make sure the end user is being heard. That's not something that you see very often in agencies when they go through their process. They will, of course, get them in, go through the forms, kind of like Michael showed earlier. It can be a lot of forms. It shouldn't be that arduous to try and go through these government services. And whenever you have them show up to Oversight and they speak, that's one of the things that is really on their mind. Will people listen to them who are working in the agency, other than, I just want to go ahead and get this appointment over with? I want to go ahead and get this done, have the form filled out, and move along. So I totally agree with Michael. I think the agency workers really going, and leadership too, spending time with the end user and finding out what makes it better. That's what we try to do through our legislative process.
Thank you very much. And we have one discussion unfolding both in our Q&A and in one of Jen's typed answers, and that's on human resources and hiring. And I'll ask the question, who do we need to hire in government to make public services more human-centered, more outcome focused rather than process focused? What kind of skills are needed? And what are the main obstacles to hiring the right people in government right now?
Well, that's a topic that's close to my heart, if you don't mind me jumping in. The biggest thing I think we need to do is recognize that we have this crisis of state capacity, which is simply the ability of a government to achieve its policy goals. So if we have a policy goal that we're going to help people with food assistance, we should be able to do it. If we have a policy goal to defend our country, we should be able to do that. And the reason I'm bringing up HR here is I think there's really 3 basic ways you can do that. You can have more of the right people, you can focus them on the right things, and you can burden them less. And HR is actually a part of all 3 of those. We really need to be able to hire more of the right people. We need to hire them when we need them, but it's not just the right people, it's the right jobs, like the jobs that are focused on the things that create value. And right now, across the board in government, I think we have the balance of what I call, in very fancy language, excuse me, stop energy and go energy is just off. I know it's second grade language, but that's where I live. You wouldn't drive a car without a brake. You have to have that stop energy, the guardrails, the things that slow things down and say, let's make sure we got this right. I absolutely believe that we need stop energy. But I also believe we have too much stop energy right now relative to the go energy. And so when you say, like, who do we need to hire? We need to hire go energy jobs. Like, it's not just that the people have a general go, let's get this thing done orientation, but that their job is also defined as getting things done instead of stopping things from happening, or at least that the balance is correct. That is another really important role for the job of HR writ large. We don't think of HR agencies within government as doing that level of workforce planning, but they should. They should be charged with figuring out how we rebalance between stop energy and go energy, how we get public servants that we have, as both of the co-panelists spoke to earlier, trained on the principles and practices that get us these better outcomes. And that when we hire, not only we're hiring into a job that is designed to get something done for the public, but that also that we're able to assess those people for those actual skills, not just, see if they can cut and paste from the job description. So yeah, I have a lot to say about HR and how critical the workforce is to all the things we just talked about. And I'd love to see oversight efforts at all levels of government start to interrogate the HR function, not just towards compliance. That's what we go for. Like, HR just ends up being about compliance. But can we get oversight to talk to HR about the actual outcomes that are needed and say, actually, your job is to get more go energy going in government. How can we help you make that happen? What constraints do we need to remove so that HR itself has go energy?
Representative Johnson, I would love to hear your response to that. Can you tell us about legislative oversight's role in HR and attracting and retaining the right talent for building state capacity?
Yeah. Whenever we have reviewed different agencies, that is one of the things that, especially in the last few years, before COVID, whenever we had, the recession, after the recession, during COVID, and those times whenever we were looking at these agencies, trying to get more employees into these agencies has been a struggle. It's been a struggle in South Carolina. And what we do is we meet with those leaders and what incentives are there to bring in the workforce? Where are you going? How are you trying to attract them? What type of advertising are you doing for these positions that you have? Also, pay. Wages is a big factor. The government competing with the private sector. When it comes to these positions, a lot of great talent with these government agencies do leave after a few years, and they have formed the skill set working for these governmental entities that private sectors want. And they certainly do give us great competition when it comes to the additional benefits plans and the wages. I remember there was one agency that we reviewed, and the turnaround was about 2.5 years for the employees. Yes, they're just getting picked up very, very quickly as soon as they get trained, get certification, kind of knowing what they're doing. Private sectors are grabbing them. As far as we also look at kind of what's the skill set? Is there a diverse skill set? And what does this agency do to kind of promote continuing education for the employees who are carrying out these day-to-day activities? Send them to, you know, different types of training that they can get that they enjoy doing and learning to kind of make them more diverse so that whenever they meet with these end users, those who receive these services, they're a little bit broader in their knowledge and also their day-to-day understanding of the people who receive these services, how it affects them, what all they need it for. So we've looked at many, many things in oversight, from what is your advertising that you try to do, where do you go and try to bring in applicants, and how do you compete with the private sector. So those are all ways we try to make it better. And of course, we identify those obstacles and hope we help those leaders identify those problems and hopefully make them better. And we follow up, normally within a year, we follow up again. And have you taken the recommendations that have come out during the hearings that we've had? And they do. And almost every agency director or leadership has said they have really enjoyed and appreciated the oversight process because it made their agency better, made them go back and reflect and see just really where, they had some shortcomings. They had a lot of great things. And that's one of the things also we look at that we carry from one agency to another. Hey, this is what this agency is doing over here. They're getting great reviews from their employees, their staff members, as to how they like how this agency is operating, how they're appreciated, those types of things. And we try to, in the oversight process, it's not just identifying problems, also where are the qualities in different agencies that you can carry from one agency to another during the oversight process that hopefully brings in new applicants, because we have some that retire, they go to the private sector. So we got to constantly be trying to find new employees to bring in, and oversight process has been great in identifying.
Thank you. And I'm afraid, running out of time here, but I want to allow Jen and Michael to respond to a little more on the HR front and some questions we've received from the audience, specifically about training, and two kind of bounce off of each other. One comes from anonymous attendee who says, most government executives have public administration, business administration, or law degrees. Training seems to be essential to implementing the concepts we discussed today. Where should that training occur? Should it happen as part of higher ed institutions, or internal training at an agency or on the job? We also, my colleague Kyle, who has her finger on the pulse of state auditors everywhere, says that the Iowa State Auditor just released a report that promotes removing degree requirements from a lot of admin and IT jobs in state government. Does this give us a shot at improving the implementation of and user-centered government initiatives? So I'll let you both answer that, and then I'm afraid that we are quickly running out of time here.
I'll just say real quick, I think the developing the pathway of talent to public serving institutions is going to be one of the very, very top design challenges ahead. And I think generally are not equipped today. And I think it's really ripe for full reimagining. One thing that we have learned on the human-centered design is, there are university programs, there are different ways to get it, but there has been a real gap on the how. There's a high interest in doing, but very little on the how. And so we have been working on, over the past 4 years, in partnership with some national philanthropies, to develop an online curriculum. So people can go to our website, Civilla.org. They can go into Practica, and it is a series of classes that individuals can take. It's free, that they can take, and it's specifically geared for public serving institutions to how might they apply human-centered design to the very issues that they would tackle. So there's like a foundations course, there's around, and user interviewing, there's and we have more that's coming online there. The thing that has surprised us about that is we've done very little announcement on it. It's had really strong uptake, but we're finding more and more teams are coming together to go through it together. And there is something powerful inside of an agency when there is a cohort that are mutually learning and sharing and applying in real time those learnings, and they just seem to be making stronger and greater headway. So Practica at Civilla.org is a resource specifically to human-centered design, but there's a much broader talent acquisition and development conversation that would have to be had for sure.
Thanks. Any other remarks on that? Yeah, Jim. Oh, I think you're muted. There we are.
Yeah, I'd love to add just a little bit. When you look at sort of the teams that develop, say, in application, we've talked about benefits applications. This is a reasonable example, but many more things like this. Very often in government, it's like there's the procurement folks, there's the folks that develop the requirement, maybe they develop the requirements in-house, or maybe they farm that out to a different contractor. But most of the competency you have in a legacy environment is actually a procurement competency, not a understanding the needs of both the bureaucracy and the users, and a development and design. And I believe in contractors, of course. I think that they're incredibly valuable, but there's a core competency that needs to sit in-house. And that is certainly sometimes an opportunity for hiring in, but I actually think it's a much better opportunity for training. So I've met so many wonderful public servants who've gotten trained on something goes by lots of different names, but it's often called being the product owner. Or the service owner. And that's simply not what they were trained to do. They were trained to, work in this legacy thing of getting a vendor in to do it, and then it's the vendor's fault if it doesn't work. Well, this is an abdication of responsibility to vendors, and it's something Oversight should be asking about, right? And when they get that training, they love their jobs. I've had so many people say, I am so excited. I'm good at this. We're getting good outcomes. It's such a much better way of doing it. And training is the key. But to the question that was asked, where should training occur? Well, what kind of training? Is it product owner or whatever? But I think the answer is everywhere. We need lots more training, and government is not set up for that. Agencies can get questions from the press, or even, yes, oversight bodies. Why are you spending money on training? Like that's, that seems like a nice to have, not a have to have. And when budgets are cut, training is the first thing to be cut. You don't cut the stuff that's compliance oriented, but the stuff that is actually building new skill sets does get cut. And it's a terrible, terrible thing when it does, because that's what's going to save you money in the long run, if it's the right kind of training. I'll also say it's not just the skills that we've talked a lot about here, but in the federal government now, there's something called DITAP. It's the Digital something technology acquisition program. And it basically trains procurement folks to work with digital service teams, to work with people who work like Michael's team does, and to procure the right contractors to get a, say, benefits application that works for its users. And they're now, I think there's supposed to be a requirement that every big technology acquisition it has to be done by someone who's been through DITAP training by 2025. States should be doing that. Cities should be doing that. They have to build the training. They have to implement it. They have to get people to go through it. We're also now developing something at the federal level that's basically that, but for hiring, so that we can hire those right people, use the right assessments. So it's not, there's so many kinds of training, and we could invest literally 100 times more in training than we do and not be spending enough.
Well, thank you very much. And with that call to training and state capacity, I'm afraid to tell everyone that we are out of time. But let me thank you all for joining us today. A special thanks to our panelists for such a great discussion. If you enjoyed today's panel, you'll want to join us again on Monday for the next panel in our user-friendly oversight series. Jen will be back. She'll be joined by Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Justice and the chair of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. Michelle Evermore will be here. She's one of the nation's foremost experts in unemployment insurance modernization, and we'll also have Alaska State Senator James Kaufman. They'll discuss the challenges of facilitating access to government services and benefits while minimizing waste, fraud, and abuse. That's Monday at noon Eastern. More information at levin-center.org. We hope to see you there. Once again, from all of us here at the Levin Center and from our panelists, thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you were able to make it. Thank you and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ian.
Bye.
Bye.